The sniper is a representative of that category of soldiers that evokes a mixture of admiration and disgust. The historiography of the war often forgets and glosses over the fact that it was the outstanding feats and heroism of snipers that saved the lives of many of their comrades. In the perception of the majority of people, what comes to the fore is the horrifying cold-bloodedness with which these fighters killed their victims. Among other soldiers, it is rare to meet those who, after the war, would be doomed to live with the realization that he had so many human lives on his conscience. And not depersonalized lives, but the lives of specific people whom they looked at in the telescopic sight before pulling the trigger. Almost all snipers silently carry this realization within them for the rest of their lives. These men are not the type who will constantly spread the word about their experiences. After graduation, in January 1943, like all young men from my region, I was called up for military service. I was 18 years old at that time. After receiving our equipment, we were transferred 10 days later to Mittenwald for basic infantry training. After 6 months of grueling training, I became a machine gunner. Throughout my training, the subject of snipers as a tactical aspect of infantry combat was not mentioned at all. I only heard a few derogatory remarks about Russian snipers and women with rifles, whom machine gunners must destroy decisively and ruthlessly in the first place. The preparations were heavy, but they were carried out without the fuss that one finds in an army in peacetime or in the early stages of war. On the contrary, everything was concentrated on the training of young men, preparing them for the difficulties they would face on the battlefield and teaching them a thorough knowledge of their weapons. Instructors with frontline experience tried to pass on the skills they had acquired in battle. They were aware of the high casualties among the recruits, who were immediately frightened by the terrible reality of war. The unexpected ruthless brutality of combat exposed to the new recruits caused many of them to panic uncontrollably and want to run away. Such behavior might have saved them in the old days, but now, with sophisticated weapons of war killing from a considerable distance, fleeing the battlefield was fatal. Careful training helped prepare everyone for the moment of encounter with the enemy, but it did little to control the natural instinct to flee from danger. In the last minutes before the battle, even before it begins, everyone must decide for himself whether he can calmly face the war or not. It is then that it becomes clear who is a real warrior, for whom battle is second nature, and the battlefield is home, where you have to forever face the choice of killing or being killed. Only from such a forge of military reality come sniper soldiers who know how to keep their brains clear, who are able to act on the front lines in the fire of battle, and who know how to wield their weapons with maximum effect. Only such soldiers become a sniper. On July 22nd, the Wehrmacht's struggle to restore the former German front line came to fruition, but the Russians fought with desperate courage. While camouflaged, they often demonstrated unusual fire practice, firing only from less than 50 meters away. Thus, virtually every shot hit the target. Russian snipers engendered confidence that the German infantry would soon be annihilated. When I got to the front, I immediately realized that my combat specialization was suicidal like no other. The strategic importance of machine guns inevitably meant that they were subject to fierce fire from all enemy guns. As a result, the percentage of losses among machine gunners was much higher than among other fighters. It became clear to me already in the first few days, my chances of survival depended directly on whether I could take another place in my company. When it was the 5th day of fighting, there was a thud on my left, and a shell fragment entered my left arm. I met the wound with cold fatalism, as an inevitable consequence of war. Surprisingly, the wound did not hurt and bled faintly. I tried to bend my arm and was reassured it seemed intact. I crawled back with my machine gun, took out a pack of bandages, and with the help of a comrade bandaged the laceration on the hand at the base of the thumb. An hour later, as the company moved away from the front line and there was some time to rest, I finally felt the pain. At the muster station, which also served as a basic supply and ammunition depot, a doctor was treating the wounded. I went there to have my wound examined. The improvised hospital was housed not far from the regimental headquarters in a small house. Without a single emotion, I listened to the moans, howls, and screams. The smell of rotting flesh was no longer nauseating to me. One of the medics was sorting the arrivals according to the severity of their injuries. A very young soldier was brought in on a cloak tent. I looked at his face first. Monotonous moans were coming out of the soldier's throat. The medical sergeant lifted the soldier and examined his chest. There were no injuries on the front, but between the shoulder blades there was a gaping hole where 2 hands could fit through. Shards of ribs and spine were visible. The medic carefully laid the wounded man back on the tent and said we couldn't help this guy. Death for him would be the most merciful at this injury. Take him to the priest's barn. All the hopeless were taken to the barn, where the chaplain endeavored to provide the mortally wounded with what modest comfort he could. My wound was assessed as not serious. I had to wait in line to be seen by a medical sergeant who expertly cleaned dirt and stitched open wounds. Behind me sat a soldier whose right forearm was bandaged with a handkerchief. Stretched with a stick like a tourniquet, his nearly severed arm swayed on the last remaining tendons like ropes. He stared motionless at the floor, in a state of shock. It was another 3 hours before my turn finally came. Without a word, the medical sergeant removed the bandage, examined the wound for foreign bodies, and then disinfected it with a solution. With great physical strength, the medical lance corporal grabbed my arm and turned his back to me, blocking my view of the wound. As soon as he did so, the sergeant without anesthesia began quickly and skillfully, scraping away the dirt, trimming the edges of the wound and sewing it up. Holding my arm with a steely grip, the lance corporal said, "Scream if you want to, it will shut off your consciousness from the pain." And then I felt myself losing control, overwhelmed by the pain. I was supposed to rest until the wound healed. So I was moved for 14 days to the regimental transport unit, along with others of my fellow soldiers who were also lightly wounded. We were ordered to do light auxiliary work. During this period the regiment, which had suffered heavy losses, was moving to the rear to be replenished with men and material. I had worked as a carpenter before the war, and so was assigned as assistant to the junior armament officer. I was tasked with sorting captured weapons and, once on the mend, mending the butts of damaged German carbines. It was here in the relative safety of the regimental headquarters that, after reflecting on the situation, I firmly decided to try to avoid service as a machine gunner at the earliest opportunity. It was a sign of fate, of course, that among the weapons I was sorting through I found one Russian sniper rifle. Just seeing it, I hurriedly asked the non-commissioned weapons officer if I could train with it. They had enough Russian ammunition. The officer suddenly felt that before him was the right man for such a job. He said, "Show me what you can do and maybe you were born to be a sniper. We need guys like that to give our enemies a good beating. You know what a nightmare their snipers have made our lives." I started practicing that same night. After a few days, it became clear that I was a natural sniper. Without any apparent effort I hit from 100 meters a matchbox, and from 300 a wooden cartridge box, measuring 30 by 30 centimeters. 14 days of rest passed quickly, the wound was healing, and it was time for me to return to my company. When I said goodbye to the junior weapons officer, he handed me a rifle with a telescopic sight. And in the first days of August, 1943, I returned to my company with a sniper rifle in my hands. When I reported to the sergeant about my arrival, he without ceremony handed me a black badge for my wounding along with my award documents. My life as a machine gunner was over, but my service was just beginning. I was now a sniper and was asked to give the enemy a good thrashing.